late in the day. But as I said, most places dry, bright with some sunshine, not spectacularly warm, temperatures close to average by the afternoon, getting into the high teens, feeling pleasant in the sunshine. That patchy rain continues over northern Scotland. Elsewhere it stays dry during Wednesday evening. Again, clear skies will allow it to turn fairly chilly, maybe a little bit of mist here and there as well, but generally it's going to be another fine day on Thursday with sunny spells. Any early morning mist should tend to disappear. As we go through the morning, the cloud will start to thicken with some patchy rain just coming into the Western Isles and Northern Ireland. That could become a little more extensive during the afternoon. But for much of the rest of this week, bar the odd shower, most places staying dry with some sunny spells and chilly mornings.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, food. It is expensive, isn't it? But do you think the government should directly intervene? If so, doing what? Would you be, for example, a fan of price caps and the like? Really? Rishi Sunak getting more involved or less? And speaking of more, taxes. Higher taxes used to be preserve of the very wealthy, didn't they? Now, more and more of you will soon be paying 40% tax. Do you feel rich? What are the Tories doing? Is it time for them to slash taxes and be the party that they're actually supposed to be? And landlords, are they heroes or villains? Were you once a landlord? Would you ever become a landlord in this day and age? Do we need more of them or less? And what are we doing with kids today? If you ask me, we are setting them up to fail. All the time, they're getting trigger warnings, safe spaces. You know, this exam is too tough. And now people are saying about exams, should kids be tested at all? Apparently, they're too tough. I mean, come on, we are really failing our kids. Are we not? And Suella Braverman is warning that this rush for multiculturalism is basically a recipe for disaster. Is it? We'll have it all to come, but before we do, let's bring ourselves up to speed with tonight's latest headlines.
Michelle, thank you. Good evening to you. The top story on GB News today. The Prime Minister will tell world leaders the international system for policing human trafficking isn't working. Rishi Sunak is currently in Iceland, where he's due to address the Council of Europe. He's going to say the world's most vulnerable people are paying the price for unlawful migration. That's as the government tries to implement the illegal migration bill, which is currently going through the House of Lords. The new law aims to tackle small boat crossings, sending asylum seekers back home or to a third country such as Rwanda.
The UK should be at the heart of putting this agenda on the international minds of different people and institutions. That's what we'll be doing today, talking to other countries about cooperating, but also talking to the European Court. Now, part of my approach is to put new laws in place in the UK. That's our Stop the Boats bill. It's novel, it's ambitious, but I believe it is compliant with our international obligations. But at the same time, we want to make sure that the European Court is always conducting itself in a way which is fair, which is effective, which is transparent.
The Environment Secretary has today stressed the importance of an affordable, sustainable and resilient food supply chain at the Farm to Fork Summit in Downing Street. The government's promising a fairer price for farmers' produce and has pledged to get more of their products on the supermarket shelves. The latest figures show meat, yoghurt and vegetables are just some of the items that have doubled in price compared to a year ago amid high inflation. Dewbs Co says the package of measures will boost the food supply chain and grow the economy.
I'm conscious that our supermarkets get involved in a variety of ways on how they help consumers. I'll leave that to the Select Committee, but what is critical is coming here today, getting the food supply chain from the farm, indeed the sea, right through to the fork, and about how we can continue to work together to have that security of food production, but also making sure we have a resilient one and an affordable food production as well.
Dewbs Co speaking there. Now, 3 men who supplied fake passports to criminals have been jailed today. Anthony Beard, Christopher Zitek and Alan Thompson helped murderers and drug dealers evade justice. Beard, who paid vulnerable people for their expired documents, was sentenced to 6 years and 8 months. His accomplices will serve a combined term of 11 years. The National Crime Agency's Deputy Director Craig Turner says the falsified passports served as a golden ticket for organised crime.
These organisations were involved in drug trafficking, kidnap and money laundering on an international scale. A fog passport allowed those organised criminal networks in order to travel abroad, in order to carry out their business, but also allowed them to obviously evade captive by obviously law enforcement that actually obviously sought to arrest them.
Essex Police is investigating an allegation of serious sexual assault against Solihull MP Julian Knight. It follows a referral by Scotland Yard and comes after the Metropolitan Police dropped its investigation into a claim more than a month ago. Mr Knight, who's been stripped of the Conservative whip, has denied what he described as a false and malicious accusation. He doesn't plan to run at the next election. 2 members of an organised crime group who smuggled 41 migrants into the UK have been jailed. Mohammed Ahwed was sentenced today to over 2.5 years in prison at a Belfast court. His partner, Ahmed Omar, was jailed for 2 years back in March. An investigation by the Home Office found both men charged migrants £5,000 per journey. Both pleaded guilty to assisting unlawful immigration. Russia's and Ukraine's presidents have both agreed to meet African leaders to discuss a peace plan to end the war in Ukraine. A spokesperson for the South African president's office has said both Putin and Zelensky have agreed to host the African leaders' peace mission in their respective capitals, Moscow and Kyiv. It's being backed by African leaders of Senegal, Uganda, Egypt, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia. President Zelensky has previously said that all Russian troops must leave his country for any peace deal to take place. Here at home, the head of the Royal College of Nursing is urging union members today to vote in favour of further walkouts to strengthen her hand in negotiations with the government. Addressing the annual conference earlier on, Pat Cullen said the government will be forced to improve their offer if the union has another 6-month strike mandate. A postal ballot on new industrial action will open next week after the RCN turned down a 5% pay rise this year and a one-off payment for last year. She also demanded the Prime Minister come to the negotiating table.
Absolutely nobody wants to see twice as many nurses take strike action or twice as many hospitals affected by a strike. Prime Minister, you did the right thing to open negotiations with me in February. Before the 75th birthday of the NHS this July, let's get the job finished.
Greggs Bakery has revealed its sales have surged by nearly a fifth over the last year. The bakery chain says its food is attractive to customers looking for a cheaper alternative amid the rising cost of living. Sales, in fact, grew by 17% over the last 12 months, and Greggs say part of their success is because stores are staying open for longer, selling a wider variety of hot foods in the evening. Just before I go, some breaking news for you concerning bird flu. Details sketchy at the moment, but we're learning that it has been detected in 2 poultry workers in England. Bird flu has been detected in 2 poultry workers in England. There are no signs, we're told by the UK Health Security Agency, however, of human-to-human transmission. Further detail on that will be brought to you as soon as we get it. That's all from me. You're watching GB News, Britain's news channel.
Thanks for that, Polly. I'm Michelle Dewberry. Alongside me, the political sketch writer at The Times, Quentin Letts, and the contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker. Good evening, gentlemen.
Evening.
We had fun at Buckingham Palace, didn't we?
We did. This is less grand, but very colourful.
Just as exciting, though.
Yes. Look at you, all blue.
Exciting. Yes, and I've come dressed as the backdrop again. I need to not dress the same as my set. I really do need to get that memo into my head. What's on your mind tonight at home? GB Views at GBNews.uk is how you reach me on the email, or you can tweet me at GBNews. Lots to talk about tonight, I can tell you. Let's start with food, shall we? Have you noticed the price of your shop going up? If you have not, please can you tell me where you've been shopping, please, because I would like to head there myself, because prices are through the roof in various places, whether it's meat, yoghurt, veg, apparently. They seem to have doubled in price. Let's have a little look, if I can show you some of the figures just to show you what we're playing with. There you go. Cheese up over a quarter. Milk pretty much about a quarter again. Veg 15%. Meat 14%. It's astronomical, especially when you consider that everything else seems to be going up as well. Quentin, let me start with you. What do you make to it all?
You shouldn't ask a fat old sketch writer to talk about food, but a year ago I did an Any Questions thing on Radio 4, and one of the questions was, why is food so cheap? Now look at what's happening. You can say, well, the reason it's gone up in price is because everything else has gone up. So energy prices, fertiliser prices, wages for farmers, and everything else. But this may be good news for farmers and that they may be getting a better return. I think they were being swizzed about a year ago. But some things are still amazingly cheap, it strikes me. I go to the supermarket and a bag of carrots for 17p or something like that. You can't afford the seed for that. So I think compared to 40 years ago and earlier centuries, I'd say food is remarkably cheap, but it is a worry for people in their household shopping.
Indeed, Michael?
Carrots are 40p where I shop.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, in the break, we can swap carrot notes then, see what's occurring, and see if I can get him to go
Notes
shopping
for a bargain,
with you.
old boy.
Yeah, there you go. This is the TV show all in itself. You can take him shopping.
I go for the wonky stuff.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh,
Go
I
on.
wouldn't touch that. I suppose one of the causes you didn't mention was climate change, actually. So one of the reasons we are seeing high food prices, obviously the war in Ukraine, and all of these issues when it comes to, well, I mean, Brexit is involved. Obviously, there's also food inflation, which is higher in Germany, so it's not purely Brexit, but I think that has something to do with it. But I think we are going to be seeing supply chain disruptions quite a lot more in the future, because what we thought was after COVID, we're going to get this supply chain disruption, we'll have a bit of inflation, then it will go away. Then something else came up. The war in Ukraine came up. Now, extreme weather is coming up in parts of Europe that produces tomatoes and salads. So I think we probably need to be looking a bit more long-term. How do we have food security in this country? What are the uncertainties and the challenges that have come up in the future that we need to be sort of aware of?
Well, things, I mean, it depends slightly on the harvest as well. And, you know, this spring has been very wet and cold so far, but that might help produce a good harvest. You never know.
Well, let's speak to a chap that might know a thing or two, shall we? Because there has been this big kind of summit conference, call it what you will, all about farm to fork. Today, Mike Tufnell, the president of the Country Land and Business Association, was there. He joins us now. Good evening to you. What do you think the core driver of food inflation is right now, Mark?
Well, good evening, Michelle. Well, both Quentin and Michael are right. We've had so many external shocks to the system. Last year we had a drought, we had a shortage because of that. This year we've had problems with fertilizer prices being very high. We've got the issue in Ukraine continuing. And my members who are involved in the food sector are continuing to suffer from those high prices. And I think our farmer members are hoping very much for a fair price for them. And what was so important about the summit today was that the Prime Minister brought together producers, processors and retailers into the same room to talk about how we take food from the field to your fork, and has come forward with some initiatives.
So have you left that meeting feeling reassured? Are you positive? Do you think these initiatives, as you call them, will actually make a blind bit of difference to you?
They are a step in the right direction. There's some positive thinking on exports in particular. There's some additional trade envoys to make sure that our exports of our brilliant British produce can go out to overseas. There's a chink to suggest that there will be some planning reforms to help with the development of farm buildings, because planning needs to be overhauled when you look at the wider rural economy. And there is a push towards helping with innovation, because the fruit, horticulture and vegetable sector is in need of investment, and there are specific measures for that.
Let me ask you very briefly, final question. Do you think that a few people among the supply chains are basically being greedy when it comes to how much they're increasing their prices?
Well, the grocery code adjudicator looks at pricing from the producer through to the processor and the end customer, and that hasn't been shown. I don't think necessarily people are greedy. They're taking a fair share of the profit. And
what's a fair share of profit? What's a fair share of profit in a cost of living crisis?
The supermarkets will always argue that they have a very small percentage of the profits, sort of 1% to 2%. The processors are there competing. And then the farmers, we only get a very small percentage of the overall pound that's spent. So it's looking at that overall chain, which was part of the discussion today, that is so key to make sure there is fair competition that goes through. And the horticulture and the egg sector in particular is being looked at by government, and they've just finished looking at the dairy sector to make sure there are no excess profits.
OK, interesting stuff. Mike Tufnell, the president of the Country Land and Business Association, thank you very much for your time. I am concerned, Michael, actually, that there are a few too many places and people capitalising on all of the things that we mentioned. There's so many causes, whether it's, I don't know, people blame Brexit or Ukraine or lockdowns or whatever. I think there are one too many people that have seen an opportunity here to make a few quid.
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, it depends on certain businesses. So in some businesses, it will be that genuinely the costs of supply have gone up and they don't have much choice but to raise it. There'll be other sectors where they've kind of got lucky. Their prices haven't gone up very much, but they can follow the wave of inflation and say, well, we'll rise our prices anyway and make a bit of a packet. So it's a bit about passing the difference between those. I mean, I was quite interested to read today that I think Heinz has a 30% profit margin, which seems extraordinary. And ketchup has gone up by a huge amount at the moment. So I am sure there are some profits that can be squeezed, but there will also be farmers who will understandably be saying, well, look, the cost of fertiliser, the cost of oil has gone up, and there's been some bad harvests.
And maybe we should waste less. I mean, the amount that people chuck away is ridiculous.
But why do you think they're chucking away so much food?
Because not very clever buying sometimes, buy too much, you know, the eye is bigger than the tummy. And also, perhaps, some stuff doesn't keep as well as it might.
But, you know, I wonder if there's a lack of knowledge. Because
undoubtedly.
In terms of what can you freeze, how long can you freeze stuff for, how do you defrost stuff, can you store things this way, that way, the other? I cannot for the life of me fathom at schools, why don't we teach kids anymore about
I mean, the parents should be doing it as well. You know, it's some of their responsibility.
Yes, but I don't mean to be rude, but some parents are just gormless when it comes to things like this. So if you've
become less gormless.
Yes, but but then you need to be taught that, don't you? If you don't know what you're doing and your mum doesn't know what she's doing and her mum didn't know what she's doing, around and around you go.
Well, you've got to teach yourself, perhaps. But I will just reiterate that food today is amazingly cheap compared to previous decades and centuries. And the price of chicken, for instance, you go to the supermarket, go to Aldi or whatever, chicken, fish, frozen fish, amazingly cheap.
I suppose it depends on what your income is, doesn't it? And I think that's probably what's missing from this conversation so far.
No, but in comparison to previous decades and centuries.
Well, potentially, but I mean, in comparison to 2 or 3 years ago when people might be budgeting it compared to. So the reason there is a cost of living crisis, which so many people are really fundamentally struggling from at the moment, is because prices have gone up by a lot more than wages. And what we keep hearing from the government is we can't increase public sector wages because that would fuel inflation. And that seems a bit silly to me when what we're talking about here is supply chain issues which have caused food to go up in prices. You can't give nurses a wage cut and think that's going to reduce the prices of eggs and fish and carrots. So I think what we need to be talking about is how do we uplift people's wages so they can manage these kind of external shocks which we're seeing.
And then around we go, because you talk about uplifting, increasing wages, and it's splashing on a lot of the front pages today that actually the higher people's wages go, the more likely many people will now be dragged into a 40% tax bracket because the thresholds have been frozen now. I think it's for 6 years. What do you make to that?
Well, I suppose to start with, if you're at that top bracket, you're probably not one of the most sort of desperate people who are on strike at the moment now anyway, so it is important to have some perspective here. I mean, I suppose when it comes to the tax system, my position is that actually taxes should be higher overall. I look at countries where you have a more sort of civilised style of living, where productivity is higher, actually. So most of Europe, for example, France, Germany, Sweden, Norway, all of these places where they have an excellent welfare state, where people aren't waiting months and months and months for operations, and they have tax as a proportion of GDP at around, well, France, it's 40%, in many of those countries, about 45%. Here, it's 35%. So I would say we should be making a political argument that actually having higher taxes would be good. I suppose the problem with how it's been done is it can seem a bit arbitrary. So it's not the case that the government have made an argument for higher taxes and then, you know, made a progressive argument where you tax the rich more, which is what we should be doing. They've instead done it by stealth.
But they're all at it. They're all putting up taxes. They love taxes. Politicians adore taxes because it allows them to spend our money and then claim all the credit themselves. And I think you could easily make the case for having lower taxes as a stimulus to the economy, which would then make everyone feel better off.
Take it down to what? It would be wrong. To what level?
I would still make it because I'm so fed up of paying taxes. I'm so fed up of giving Jeremy Hunt my money. Oh, drives me nuts.
Make your argument then. What level would you take it down to?
Oh, certainly bring it down 5p in the tax rate, the top tax rate.
So you'd get rid of the 45, bring that to 40?
Yeah.
And then what?
That would stimulate the economy, and it would
so you'd go
for growth.
You'd go all Liz
I would
Truss.
go with one difference though. Liz Truss got into trouble because she's just said I'm going to cut taxes, and she didn't say where she was going to reduce government spending. And you have to do a bit of that as well. So I, for instance, would spend less on walking and bicycling strategies, on which we're going to spend 10 billion in the next 4 years.
But isn't that getting people out walking and all the rest of it? Isn't that going to have a...
Let them do it themselves. Don't spend my money doing it, please.
I mean, we've had 13 years of austerity. I really don't
We
think there's
haven't,
much public
we haven't.
appetite. I don't think there's much public appetite for cutting the state to the bone even more.
I think there is,
we just went through a pandemic where I think what was very, very clear is that this logic, this sort of mantra of efficiency savings, where you say, what we're going to do is cut back these public services so there's no spare capacity at all. What then happened was there was an external shock. We keep coming back to these. In that case, it was COVID. What happened? The NHS fell over. Right, so I think this idea that what we want to do...
The NHS was pulled over by the ridiculous response to COVID, turning the NHS into the National COVID Service. That's what happened with the NHS.
I mean, I fundamentally disagree with that.
Well, that's all right. I don't care. I've got a thick skin.
I was just checking we had time to go into that.
No, we don't. I've been in trouble for going to a break. I do have to go to a break, not because I can't handle someone fundamentally disagreeing with me, but because I do need to go to a break. And you'll be appreciating this, because when I come back, I want to talk about landlords, which I know is a topic that you are equally passionate about. So we'll have this COVID thing, on another show. I know my viewers have strong opinions on it as well.
Well done.
Yeah, there you go. You've got a future booking out of that.
Be able to pay your tax bill.
Help me pay for my carrots.
Yeah, there you go. You don't need help paying for your carrots, because he's taking you shopping. He's going to fix your bill. Right. I'll be back in 2 with your thoughts on that. And also, are you a landlord? Would you ever be a landlord? Do we need more of them or less? See you in 2.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry. Alongside me, political sketch writer at The Times, Quentin Letts, and contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker. Good evening back, everybody. Douglas says, Michelle, as a farmer, we only get paid 23 pence a litre for milk. Andy, in Brittany, that's nice. You say, I live in France and the prices have gone up just as much, if not more. You say, I know that won't fit many people's narrative, that it's only a UK problem and i.e. a Brexit one. Graham says it's down to the public to cut back and let the supermarkets suffer. Price caps, says Alan, surely that is just basic communism. I don't think I want Rishi Sunak involving himself in much more. To be honest, I'd be far happier if the state was doing less at the moment. Anyway, let's talk landlords, shall we? Are you one of them? Do we need more or less of them? Basically, you might be familiar by now with some of the reforms coming down the track. I'm going to cut straight to the chase because this is a bit of your forte. You blog on this kind of stuff, etc. Where do you stand on it all?
So in terms of the rental reform bill, I think this is the bare minimum. I know the argument from the landlord lobby is to say that if you increase the rights of renters, then some of us will sell up and that will make life for renters harder. Now, I do think we should take that seriously, but I think what that means is we should have the government planning to build more homes and build more social housing, for example.
But they don't have a good track record of doing that, do they? So where are these people going to live in the meantime if the landlords do sell up?
Well, they'll have to work on that. I mean, I suppose the argument I'm going to make is that the reforms in the rental reform bill are the bare minimum that makes renting livable. There are a bigger and bigger section of society who are now living in the private rental sector. And so to use my personal example here, and I know I'm not the person who's most messed up by the rental market in the UK right now, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to stay in my house after August. I don't know if my rent's going to go up by 15%. It went up by 15% last summer. Very, very difficult to make any kind of long-term plan because you don't have any kind of long-term contract. So at the moment, it's the case that in the UK, the only way to have housing security, if you're not able to get on the social housing waiting list, which is very, very long, is to buy a house. Now, that's unaffordable for lots of people.
Or you could get a long-term let. Not all lets are a year.
Well, no, it's very difficult to get a long-term let. So again, last summer, when they raised our rent by 15%, we had to say yes because, you know, you don't have much choice, you don't have any rights at the moment. But we said, OK, 15%, we'll do that, we'll struggle, but we'll do that. But can we have a 2-year contract? And they said, no, you can have a 12-month contract. And why wouldn't they? Because from their perspective, the fewer rights we have, the more control they have. So they were very happy to say, well, we'll give you a 12-month contract, then we'll see where the market is in a year's time. Now, at the moment, the system incentivises them to do that. And I think if we're going to have more and more people living in the private rental sector, which it seems we are, we do have to make that a sector where people can make long-term plans, where people can bed into a community, and where people don't have to dread getting an email every summer or every winter, depending on when your tenancy starts, telling you how much more of your income is going to get eaten up paying a landlord.
Quentin?
I'm a landlord. Well, my wife and I are landlords. And we borrowed some money and bought a property, and it was speculation. And we had tenants in it. And we had about 4 or 5 tenants. And only one was any good, and the rest were a disaster. I made a mess of the house, didn't pay the rent, caused lots of hassles. And so we've stopped doing it now. It's just not worth it.
What does that mean? Have you sold the house? Or
No, we're going to try and do holiday lets,
Right.
and if they don't work, then we'll just get rid of the house. And it's a great pity because it was the idea was to have something for our retirement and sort of pay our way through retirement, and it's now looking a bit dicey because the main reason for it is the tax hassles. The government hassles on things like having to have an energy
What do you mean the tax
certificate.
hassles? Do you mean that you can't offset your mortgage against the rent?
Well, the taxation is now much less good than it was when we first went into it. The Treasury has clawed back some advantages that George Osborne brought in, and the sort of regulatory burden is a nuisance.
To me, this boils down to a fundamental question, and that is, do people agree with the premise that a house is an asset to be able to make money from? That, for me, is the fundamental crux of the matter.
What's wrong with that? I mean, it's a business, isn't it? I mean, one tries to be entrepreneurial and to be self-sufficient economically, and you get whacked by the Treasury.
But if you couldn't afford to get on the housing ladder, and then the tables were reversed, so you're now desperately trying to get on the rental ladder and you're renting and people are kicking you out and increasing your thing, and he was sitting there with 4 houses. I'm not saying you've got 4 houses, by the way, I'm role-playing. I'm doing my own Dewbs Co Monopoly board. You've got 4 houses. Would you look at him and go, yes, it's a business, or would you be sitting there going, this is just... It's not fair.
I'm sure Mike will be a very, very good tenant, but the tenants we've had have been a total nightmare and have been unreasonable, and they've made such a filthy mess of the house that it's just been unbearable. It's been heartbreaking, actually, because we get the place ready, all clean, and we come and find it covered in all sorts of undescribable mess.
I think where I disagree here, and it's on quite a philosophical level, you sort of say it's a business, it's profit-making. Now, there is some use to having the profit motive in some parts of the economy. So what that will drive is efficiency, it will drive more production. When it comes to the private rental market, that's not what happens. So when you bought a house, you can call it entrepreneurship, but you bought a house that already existed. If you didn't buy it, it would still be there. And so to me, the private rental system is different to other areas of the economy, because essentially what you've got is people who have the capital which they can leverage to buy a house, getting working people who don't have that capital to pay them a third of their income for doing nothing. I mean, you know, you might have to change the light bulb every now and again, but it's not a normal job. So to me, there's a sort of feudal relationship which underlines landlordism, which is quite different to many other businesses.
It's not my understanding of the word feudal, but you're basically making a communist argument, and that's a perfect...
It's not a communist argument, it's a social democratic argument to say that there are many areas of the economy...
A social democratic argument at the communist end of the swimming pool.
What I'm saying is quite specific. There are many areas of the economy where the profit motive works well. You know, I don't think it should be left to its own devices. I think we need regulation, but it does encourage innovation. It does encourage efficiency savings. That's not going to be the case where you've got a group of people buying a set of assets which already exist, because obviously when you become a landlord, a new house isn't created. When you stop being a landlord, a new house doesn't disappear. The product which people are consuming has stayed exactly the same. All that's happening is a transfer of wealth.
Who's going to
from
provide these houses otherwise?
People.
Who's going to provide the housing?
Well, so in Vienna, which is named actually by The Economist, so a free market newspaper, as the best place to live in the world, 60% of the Viennese live in social housing. Why that works so well is because you've got all different classes there, which means
housing in this country is such a disaster. People don't look after it.
But the reason social housing is a bit of... Well, I wouldn't agree that social housing is a disaster, but the reason it is of a lower quality here than it is in, say, Vienna, is because, especially due to Margaret Thatcher, what happened to social housing is it became a residual
as the dreaded
tenancy.
Thatcher.
No, but it's true. So essentially what you did with Right to Buy is more of the sort of middle-class tenants, they were able to buy their homes.
So are you wanting more people dependent on the state?
Yes. But because we have examples of this, and they're not communist examples. So Vienna, again,
it ends up in a drab...
No, it doesn't, because...
East German sort of...
No, Vienna... So this is a good... I made a podcast on Vienna. So in this country, if you see swimming pools on the top of tower blocks, for example, that's a big sign of gentrification. This is an area which has become completely unaffordable. In Vienna, social housing has swimming pools on the roof, saunas and swimming pools on the roof. And that's because all different sections of society live there, so there is a demand to make it luxury.
Can I ask you a question? If you owned a property, it was your home, you settled whatever, and you had a bit of spare cash, whether it was releasing equity in your home or whatever, windfall another way, would you buy a second property to be able to provide for yours and your children's income into your later years if you could financially afford it?
I think because of my views on landlordism, I'd find that uncomfortable, but I do want to stress that...
but it might be uncomfortable, but would you do it? If you had the cash, would you buy a second property in order to secure your family's financial security?
I mean, if it was the only way to secure my family's financial security, that's a difficult question. But I mean...
Well, it's not ever going to be the only way. I'm asking you, would you buy a second property if you had the financial means to secure the financial future of your family?
So personally, I wouldn't. But I want to be clear that I'm not here to judge anyone who does. I don't think this should be sort of a moralising argument where all landlords are terrible people. What I essentially think is we have a system which isn't really working well for ordinary people because you're incentivising people to speculate on housing, which should really just be
I think it is working quite well. The trouble is it's struggling to keep up.
It might be for you, but you're a landlord.
No, but the housing supply is struggling to keep up with immigration levels.
Well, we're going to come on to some of these topics a bit later on at the top in the show, but I tell you what, no matter which side of the fence you sit on, surely, people out there, you don't think that it's all working well at the moment, do you? How can it be the situation that some people can have multiple homes, no problem with that, by the way, and other people literally cannot even get onto the ladder to have a single one? What do you do about it then? What's the answer? I don't know, you tell me. I want to talk about kids after the break. Are we setting them up to fail? All these trigger spaces, safe spaces, whatever, the latest thing under the spotlight is exams. Apparently, kids are finding things like SATs too difficult, so is it time to scrap them? Give me a break. What do you say? I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, alongside with the political sketch writer at The Times, Quentin Letts, and the contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker. We just continued that property conversation into the break. Andrew says, I've got 2 rental properties, and when my tenants serve me notice, I'll be selling both. And he says it's happening up and down the country, and he says, in his mind, it will cause a housing crisis created by politicians. I suspect, though, other people will say if you're going to sell those houses, that will create a surplus of stock, and it might actually bring property prices down. I guess it's the flip side of that. John says, I've got a buy-to-let flat. All of this stuff, pushing landlords, is simple. It just means that I increase my rent to cover the new costs. Lots of you are just saying that basically this is the government trying to cover up the fact that it's them that are causing this problem by not meeting property bill targets. Anyway, keep your thoughts on that one coming in. Let's talk kids, shall we? Lots to get into on this one. I worry, so I do. As a mum, I worry, because I think as a society, we are way too soft on children. All the time, you're trying to protect their feelings, you're trying to shield them from absolutely everything, and then once they get out into the real world, they simply cannot cope, if you ask me. The latest thing, Michael, that's coming under fire at the moment is the topic of SATs, the exams. People are saying that children are getting upset, they can't cope. So is it time to scrap these exams? What I would say to that is it's time to perhaps build resilience in your kids. Exams are not supposed to be easy. You're not supposed to be hop, skipping and jumping in there, singing Mary Poppins theme tune, and as you go, you're supposed to be a little bit anxious about them, surely.
Well, I think it depends on what exams, and SATs are quite specific. So SATs you do when you're in year 6, year 11, and I don't think the idea is this is supposed to incentivise kids to learn. SATs were sort of introduced because what you want to be able to do is compare schools. It's about accountability for schools, not about pressure for kids. And so
Are they like the old IQ test?
Well, no, because the IQ test wouldn't.
But we never used to. We used to take the IQ test, and you didn't actually know it was happening. It was very subtle.
It could be like that. Exactly. So what this is for is to incentivise schools to meet standards. It's not to try and get kids to compete with each other. And so I think if you've got a situation which is being described in the news today, where you've got kids who are bursting into tears because they're so stressed about these SATs, something's gone wrong, because that's not what they were intended for. And I don't think there is much sort of benefit in putting loads of pressure on 11-year-olds to pass tests. I mean, in some of the countries where they've got the best educational outcomes, so Finland, for example, kids don't start school until they're 7.
Not Vienna?
They play until... Well, not Vienna. I don't know how they do education in Vienna.
You're very hard on Vienna.
Well, they play for a lot longer period of time. We've also seen today that there was... the UK has gone up in reading and writing, which is great, good. But what surveys have also shown is that kids in this country like to read less, so they enjoy it less. So I think potentially sort of turning primary schools into an exam factory.
But that's parenting, isn't it? Your child will surely get a joy of reading when you, as a parent, invest your time into reading to said kids.
I think it's a bit of both, isn't it? Obviously, the parenting matters, but I think schooling will also matter. And do we want to turn, especially primary schools, into exam factories, I think is something we should think pretty
I've got 3 children, and I hope they're happy. They're grown up now, but I always took the view that, like chewing gum, they could be stretched a bit. And the child quite often will benefit from pressure and will achieve more as a result of that. I've got a daughter-in-law who's a Chinese woman who is a teacher, and she's come to teach in England, and she is amazed at how lax we are with our children and how we don't expect more of them. And she's also appalled by the discipline levels in British schools.
What do you mean the lack of?
The lack of discipline.
Yeah, I was going to say.
She's amazed
at how
by
disciplined they are.
Appalled.
Yeah.
So I think, she thinks that children here could be pushed a lot harder. Now, there are these statistics about children suffering terrible depression. I'm a bit sceptical about those figures, and I wonder whether sometimes the kids are pulling sickies and sort of saying, oh, I've got this terrible stress, miss, I can't possibly do my English homework. So I think kids probably can, on the whole, be pushed quite a long way to achieve more.
I'm not actually sure about this idea that schools aren't that strict. And the reason I say that, I'm not an educational expert, but I went to school in the 1990s, and then I worked in a school in inner London in the 2010s. Much stricter in the 2010s. I think there were a lot of reforms to schools, and potentially because of the league tables.
Blair did a lot.
Yeah, I think Blair did a lot to sort of introduce more strictness into schools, and that was unpopular with some on the left. Yeah. I actually came to believe that actually it's quite good. It's easier for kids to learn in an environment where disruptive kids can't, undermine the whole thing. Obviously, I think there's exclusions are too high, except there's ways to deal with this. But I think schools are stricter and more challenging places than we often give them credit for, and I think more so than they were when I was...
I think some subjects, having helped my children go through their homework and exams, it struck me that maths teaching got a lot better. Maths is much harder. Sciences also. English teaching is terrible, and languages have almost disappeared, it seems to me. And I think, although Tony Blair did great things in our state schools, I just get the impression that things have slipped a bit, and the teaching unions are militant and unreasonable.
Well, the funding also dropped since 2010, didn't it? So
I don't think it's all to do with money, though. I think this is to do with teachers being bloody-minded.
I've noticed, having just entered the world of parenthood, that I feel like all... my kids only at nursery, not school. But I've noticed that there's no competition element. And people perhaps would think I'm a little bit harsh, but just on silly things, like I made my son an amazing Easter bonnet. It was brilliant. It had lights on it. I spent ages. It was top-notch. And I was saying to my son, you're going to smash it, kid. You're going to win the Easter Bonnet Award. You're going to get a prize. You're going to get medals. I was basking in the glory before I'd even sent him out the door. But then there was no competition.
Gosh, you're going to be a nightmare in the mum's race at Sports Day.
There was no...
The egg and spoon, you're going to be tripping everyone up.
But there was no competition. Don't even get me started about school days, because last year they cancelled my son's sports day in advance because they worried that there was going to be a heat wave. And I got in touch with the nursery and said, I'm not happy about this because you don't even know if there's definitely going to be a heat wave. What I'm looking at doesn't seem that there is going to be one. And you're teaching these kids that Where's your resilience?
Did the teachers go into hiding when they see you coming?
No, well...
Oh, watch out, Dewberry's here.
I should have won that competition.
I must confess...
I spent ages on that hat.
Yes, I must confess, my little boy's dad just did have to have a word with me about...
You're a fast bowler, Michelle.
No, but I want my child and other children, by the way. Life is competitive.
Yeah, it is.
Some people are better at stuff than others. You don't win everything. There is competition. You've got to have something about you. You've got to apply yourself. You've got to go. And I want that instilled.
And I say that as someone whose children quite often came last. But we taught them to take it well.
There's nothing wrong with coming last. If you come last, try a bit better next time and get on with life.
Yeah.
That's what I say. I'm sure this conversation could continue as well. But I need to talk about something else before I go, everybody, because Scott Braverman, she was basically saying, look at him, I'm glad you've read the notes from the show, and always good to have people that know what they're doing on the show, isn't it? Yes. Anyway, she's saying that this whole drive for multiculturalism, I said to you I was going to tongue-tie that word, didn't I?
Multiculturalism,
yeah, thanks, Quentin. There you go. You've earned your feedback now about pronouncing words properly. Anyway, is it a recipe for disaster or not? See you in 2.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, alongside my political sketch writer at Times, Quentin Letts, and contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker. Just been talking about how it's too soft on kids. Nev, you say a point that I think is quite interesting, actually. You're saying, instead of looking at exams as the test of the child's ability, why aren't we viewing them as the test of the teacher's ability? I think that's a very fair point.
God, they wouldn't like that.
Well, it takes you into the whole Ofsted conversation, doesn't it? But that is a conversation for another day, everybody, because Suella Braverman, she has been speaking out again. She's saying that this mad drive for so-called multiculturalism, I did it. I got there. Whoo, yes, achievement, everybody. It's a tongue twister for me, that word, for some reason. Anyway, she's basically saying that it is a recipe for disaster. Do you agree?
I hear what she says, as they say, but I think she was politically ill-guided to do that, because you can criticise identity politics. The best way of criticising identity politics and multiculturalism is to take the mickey out of it and to laugh at it. But Suella sounded a bit cross yesterday, and this is not the way forward. If you're that she was saying we right-wingers, she's saying, are optimistic and the lefties are all pessimists. But she sounded pessimistic about it. She sounded cross. And she should sound happier and more amused by it and just sort of take the rise out of it.
But then do you think an element of that is perhaps because instead of presenting the thought process and the vision, what's happening is that you're coming from a position of constantly being attacked. There was God knows how many protesters
she gets all sorts of stuff thrown at her.
That's what I mean. So maybe what you're picking up on is a sense of more kind of feeling like I'm defending before I've even opened my trap.
If you are standing for public election, you've got to look as though you like the country you're trying to govern. And I just worried, I mean, even though I completely agree with her about the madness of identity politics and all the lunacy of not being able to say what a woman is, I just think you've got to sound a bit more light and a bit more laid back.
A bit more light and laid back? Michael, what do you make to her points?
I agree. Forgive me, I just briefly want to put on record, because I think there was a bit of implicit teacher bashing. I did work in a secondary school as a teaching assistant for a year. I was considering becoming a teacher. I was like, they work way too hard. So I became a journalist instead.
They get terrific pensions.
It's important to have that on record.
Better pensions than Navarra.
On the question of Suella Braverman, I mean, whenever this question of multiculturalism comes up, I'm sort of obsessing about my childhood on this show, which is a little bit bizarre. But I never take the debate too seriously. I live in one of the most multicultural places in the country. In Hackney, I was brought up in one of the most multicultural places in the country, in Waltham Forest. It was great. You know, at school, we were never taught that we should be ashamed of our country, but we did sing songs about Easter, Christmas, Diwali, Eid. You know, I've always found it just incredibly enriching. The debate has always been a little bit confusing for that reason.
It works in many ways, as you can see by Suella being and Rishi Sunak being in such senior positions. But where it goes wrong, I think, is where the communities start being represented by professional grievance groups who try to instill some sort of sense of grumpiness and no can do, and that's when people stop assimilating and becoming part of a single community, and when they sort of retreat into their silos as cultures, then that's when I worry, and it becomes less conducive to the good. But on the whole, I think this country is amazingly successful, a happy place to be. And if you go to the States and you see the unhappiness, the race unhappiness there, you think, blimey, what are we complaining about?
Yeah, and I would say, actually, that this country gets an unfair bashing because...
Well, bashes itself.
Yeah, but if you were, I don't know, an alien that was just beamed down, and all of a sudden you would hear this country being called institutional racism, institutionally racist, misogynistic, this, that and the other.
But that's the sort of professional grievance gangs doing that.
Those criticisms come relentlessly. And I know what you say about London. We sit here having this conversation, but London is almost like a different world to so many other parts of the country. It is, by definition, very, very diverse. It's a place that a lot of people gravitate to, but there are a lot of communities, a lot of towns, cities, whatever, up and down the country, that we're not that diverse, actually. And then what's happened is, and it seems to have happened really, really quickly, that there's just been so much change in those areas, and those local people look back, perhaps, and think, well, that doesn't feel like the city that I grew up in or loved or whatever.
Well, the Home Secretary yesterday was trying to make the point that it doesn't work when people try to protect a cultural group in, for instance, the grooming gangs controversy, and that is bad when people feel, because of political correctness, they can't be equal in their approach in imposing the law or demanding standards. So, I mean, there were nuances in Suella Braverman's speech which are perhaps slightly lost in some of the coverage.
Is that fair?
Well, I think my problem with what she said, I mean, I'm sure there were a bunch of problems with what she said from my perspective in her speech, but the one that stood out to me is she sort of said, for multiculturalism to work, what we have to do is be very proud of our country and venerate our history. Now, I've got no problem with people being proud of their country and venerating their history, But it wasn't the case that in my primary school and my secondary school, we all came together to think about how Great Britain had been in the war, or she wants to talk about abolishing slavery. What we just talked about was different cultures. We sung songs about Eid, as I say, songs about Diwali, songs about Christmas, and that was fine. It seems like she's somewhat overthinking
We can sing songs in the break if you want. I've got a few songs that I can sing. That's all I've got time for. Thank you, chaps, for your company in the studio. Thanks at home. Nigel Farage, up next.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Greg Dewhurst. Well, sunny spells over the next few days. There is the risk of some rain in the forecast, largely affecting the north and northwest of the UK at times. Looking at the bigger picture, high pressure holds on, keeping most weather systems at bay, but just notice they will scoot across the far north at times. This weather front perhaps sinking a little further south by Friday. Tuesday ends on a quiet note, plenty of clear spells to end the day, perhaps just a few lingering showers initially, but overnight it should be largely dry. And with that high pressure around and light winds, we could just see a few mist and fog patches. And under the clear skies, turning quite chilly, temperatures mid-single figures, perhaps an isolated touch of grass frost to start Wednesday morning, but that means sunny spells, though it is cloudier across eastern areas first thing, but the cloud tends to lift and break a little, perhaps just enough for a few light showers across central southern England for the afternoon, and then just one of those weather fronts skirting the far north of Scotland. In between, where we get the sunny spells, temperatures lifting, largely the mid to high teens.